Eurocentrism is this notion that there is only one universal culture. And that's very, very powerful and oppressive. Capitalism itself was part of a universal European culture. The critique of Eurocentrism was introduced by Joseph Needham, the great British scientist, Marxist, and the world's leading sinologist, who wrote Science and Civilization in China. And in his Within the Four Seas in 1969, Needham argued that the basic fallacy of Europocentrism, he used the term Europocentrism, is the tacit assumption that because modern science and technology, which grew up indeed in post-Renaissance Europe, are universal, everything else European is universal also. And for Amin, it's the, and also for Needham, it's the ideology of capitalism, or the ideology of imperialism, really. The idea was that because the Europe represented the universal culture, all other cultures had to follow Europe. They could retain particular elements of their own culture, but as far as universal culture was concerned, they had to follow Europe. So this is the essence of Eurocentrism. And one of the key axioms of Eurocentrism is the notion that Europe is descended from ancient Greece, that all of the thought that was developed in Greece, philosophy of nature, materialism, rationalism, was a product of a purely European Greece, and the Asian links were denied. The Greeks themselves didn't see it that way. They saw themselves as part of the larger Asian and Semitic cultures of Egyptian culture. They were very, very much integrated with those cultures and saw themselves as derivative. And this is very clearly argued by Martin Bernal in the first volume of his Black Athena. Greece then becomes the birthplace of Europe, purified of its Asian elements. But we know this to be historically wrong. Greece was really part of the Egyptian and Semitic cultures that surrounded it. This is the first edition of Eurocentrism, written around 1988. And this edition, in its preface, contains his definition of Eurocentrism. This larger edition, written 20 years later, of Eurocentrism, does not have the definition of Eurocentrism in it. That preface was removed, and a new preface put in, which starts with a definition of culturalism, the critique of culturalism. He says, in this work, I propose a critique of what can be called culturalism. I define culturalism as an apparently coherent and holistic theory based on the hypothesis that there are cultural invariants able to persist through and beyond possible transformations in economic, social, and political systems. Cultural specificity then becomes the main driving force of inevitably quite different historical trajectories. So this notion of culturalism is the belief in cultural invariants that are the driving force of history. And he says this is the primary bourgeois ideology. Now, he argues that Eurocentrism is, of course, the primary form in which culturalism is presented to us, and that the other culturalisms that have developed that are resistant to Eurocentrism, that deny Eurocentrism in favor of their own cultural invariants, they're largely defensive and in fact reactionary, in that they basically succumb to the same ideology as Eurocentrism. They end up being inverted Eurocentrisms in his terminology. They complement Eurocentrism rather than really opposing it, and complement imperialism to a large extent. So he says that all culturalisms of seeing history as determined by cultural invariance are wrong. They're wrong strategically. They're also wrong in terms of how we should understand the way in which society is put together and how it develops. We want to be able to emphasize difference. But Amin is very clear that we want to create a new universalism that brings all peoples together, and emphasizing differences may be one stage in doing that, but then we have to find a way to come together on a different basis. Amin advocated that countries in the global South de-link from capitalism and the imperialist world system. He advocated polycentrism and was an opponent of Eurocentrism and its capitalist universalism. But Amin was equally an opponent of all forms of non-Eurocentric culturalism and cultural nationalism. Was this a contradiction in his thought? What did he mean by the call for a truly universal culture, and how is this related to delinking? So the problem here is that Amin introduced this critique of Eurocentrism, but not in the interest of other culturalisms, but rather in the interest of creating a truly universal culture. That's what we want to understand. This goes back to Amin's understanding of the Enlightenment. He doesn't simply reject the Enlightenment fully. It's a dialectical negation, right? And there is a tradition that Marxism represents coming out of the Enlightenment, which is not Eurocentric and does point towards a truly universal culture. Now, for him, the modernity, he has a different definition of modernity than is characteristic of, well, modernity means a lot to a lot of different thinkers, but Amin basically defines modernity as the discovery that human beings are the self-mediating beings of nature. That is a view that was most explicitly articulated by Marx, and most in the most radical way. Now, this view came out of the Enlightenment itself, but was mixed with capitalist class structure, with the ideology of the bourgeoisie, and with Eurocentrism. But Marxism focused on the revolutionary aspect of modernity, which is an inheritance of all peoples everywhere. That modernity is all about the fact that we are the self-mediating beings of nature through history, that we can change the world, and we can focus on human development and so on. We can't just reject Eurocentrism and then say, well, fundamentalist Islam or fundamentalist anything, or some sort of going back to earlier cultures of a previous mode of production is the answer. Rather, we have to develop a universal culture that's open to all peoples, that's consistent with polycentralism and with populist, nationalist, and socialist revolutions. And so he sees delinking and the promotion of socialism as the basis of this development of a truly universal culture, that where the culture is not simply a weaker version of Eurocentrism, or the other side and subordinate side of Eurocentrism. this is important. Amin said the choice remains true universalism that is necessarily socialist or Eurocentric capitalist barbarism. We see at this time China unifying with the rest of the South, and this is crucial in the development of the BRICS, in the development of a new non-aligned movement, in the de-dollarization, and all of the struggles that are going on now. But I wanted to emphasize why China, why its approach seems to convey this universalism that Amin was talking about. And I just wanted to give a few examples. One was the link with the Global South, where the emphasis is on the development of the whole Global South in a kind of a partnership and not really an imperialist framework whatsoever. So China launched the Global Development Initiative, which has, as its 6 principles, prioritizing development, adopting a people-centered approach, benefiting all with no country and no person left behind, innovation-driven development, harmony between humanity and nature, and results-oriented action. This is a very, very big break from the standard capitalist imperialist approach. Then there's the Global Security Initiative that emphasizes indivisible security, a truly collective security for humanity that's very, very different from the dominant form that's come out of capitalism. In the Chinese approach, there should be no military blocs and military alliances, that the security of all nations should be considered under the principle of indivisible security. I don't have time to talk about all of this. The third element of their universal cultural projection that I wanted to emphasize, and I think this is rooted in a socialist approach. Of course, China is a complex society, but the third one is their emphasis on ecological civilization, which some people like Jeremy Lent have interpreted it as just coming out of Chinese culturalism, but it doesn't. It's not projected as culturalism at all. It comes out of the philosophy of nature, out of materialism, out of socialism. It builds in traditional ecological values from China, but it's projected as a path for all of humanity, and that we have to together build an ecological civilization that's quite different than what we have. And it's presented in universalist terms, not Eurocentric, not culturalist. So I think this is what Amin was talking about, and it's central to his delinking. I think that this has to be part of our dialogue when we talk about the critique of Eurocentrism. We have to deepen it and understand that what we're aiming at is not a group of culturalisms, but a truly universal culture in which all peoples belong, and does not privilege difference, but also recognizes the differences within cultures and peoples. Thank you.
南方为什么是南方？南方为什么是这个现状？我们到底将来会是一个什么样的发展方向？大家好，我是温铁军。我们准备了一个很重要的系列课程，统称为叫做“南方世界观”，希望大家适当的集中点精力，能够跟我们一起把这个5讲24节的课上下来。